we're going to follow the same procedures as we usually do. So the course that we're going to follow is we're going to have committee member introductions, officer introductions, and then we'll deal with items 1 to 4. And then after item 4, we're going to take a presentation from Mark Pullen, the Chief Planning Officer, on items 5, 6 and 7 together. I'm told that there are no objectors registered to speak. So after that, we'll have supporters. That's limited to 5 minutes. And then we are going to have committee members' questions of the officer and of any of the supporters. And then once we've done that, we'll turn to consider items 5, 6 and 7 separately. So I hope all that's clear. My name's Neil Cameron. I'm the chair of the Ebbsfleet Planning Committee, and I'm a member of the board. And I'm going to let Valerie introduce herself, and then Penny and Chris.
Hello, good afternoon. I'm Valerie Owen. I'm vice chair of the. I'm also the Ebbsfleet.
Good afternoon, I'm Penny Marsh and I'm an independent member of the Planning Committee.
Good afternoon, I'm Chris Hall and I'm also an independent member of the Planning Committee.
And Mark, would you like to introduce yourself and any team members?
Yep, thank you, Neil. Yeah, I'm Mark Pullen. I'm the Director of Planning and Place at the Ebbsfleet Development Corporation. Other people that the committee will hear from today: Simon Harrison, who's the head of design, potentially Michael Jessup, head of development management, depending upon where the questions lead us to, and Tim Sharp is here as our legal advisor as usual. Thank you.
So we'll turn to item 1, apologies for absence. And I think we've received apologies from Fred Meridas, Derek Honeysett, Jordan Mead and Lauren Sullivan. Have I covered all the apologies?
Yeah.
Good. Declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of interest other than those standing declarations? No. Any urgent items?
No, Chair.
And next item on the agenda is to approve the minutes of the meeting held on the 19th of October. And just before we do that, I had, other people may have points, but I had one point. On page 3, where there's a record of the discussion of the planning application made by Sheerness Recycling Limited, land to the south of Manor Way, Swanscombe. I think there just needs to be a slight correction. And I think the last line should read, as they have failed to comply with a similar condition in the past.
Yes,
it may be.
Chair, that was probably my fault. So yes, we can easily get that changed.
Well, it may be because it's a record of what I said, and it doesn't make sense that it was an accurate record, but I might as well try and correct it now. Thank you. So let's go to items 5, 6 and 7. Ebbsfleet Green, former Northfleet West Grid substation, Southfleet Road, Swanscombe, Kent. So this is the Ebbsfleet Green proposals. We got 3 different applications, but as I've said already, what I'm suggesting is that we have a presentation on all 3 from the Chief Planning Officer, Mark Pullen. We then have, as I've said, no objectors registered to speak. Then we have 5 minutes from the supporters. Then we can have questions, and then we'll move to consider each application separately. So Mark, over to you.
Thank you, Neil. Just to start by saying there is reference in the papers generally to the involvement of EDC working alongside the applicant on these projects. That's the development arm of the EDC. There are handling arrangements in place to sort of guide how that relationship works between the different parts of the development corporation, and those handling arrangements are online. So just to clarify that, I will now attempt to share my screen. I haven't done this for a while. Bear with me. Right, can everyone see that?
Yes.
Yes, fantastic. Okay, thank you. So, item 5. So committee members will be aware the Outline Planning Permission was granted for a residential-led scheme for the former North Fleet West grid substation sites back in 2014. That was granted by Dartford Council. Redrow have been on sites since early 2016. And as you can see in the aerial photo there, which is quite dated now, there were various components, various different phases. So this scheme, this photo shows phase 1A and 1B through here. It shows phase 1C and the Marston's pub and hotel. So the community hub and sports facilities that we're talking about today are going in through here. There are then residential phases that then go around the rest of the sites. The school is now located in the centre, and the neighbourhood house facility is roughly around there. So this is just generally a sort of an image just to show the phased approach to the delivery. Redrow are broadly going round in a clockwise fashion. So you could see phase 1A and 1B on the aerial photograph before. The neighbourhood house roughly goes in the middle here, and then the community facilities are down here. As with other things to note, the A2 runs along the southern boundary. There's an electricity substation located towards the south as well, and some allotments and a community garden going in the southwest corner. So this application seeks to vary various elements of the Outline Planning Permission to enable the delivery of the neighbourhood house and the community hub that are included in items 6 and 7 on the agenda. So the table in paragraph 6.7 of your report identifies the plans that are being updated, but I'll just run through the various different plans on the screen. So the land uses plan changes very very slightly, and you can see here there is no yellow area, and here there is a yellow area, and the yellow area is to provide the principle for the community hub. The heights have been updated to show a single-storey building where the neighbourhood house is. So you can see the changes there from the previously approved plan to the currently proposed plan, and again a change around the community hub area from a single-storey building up to from a 2-storey building up towards a 2.5 to 3-storey building there. This plan also reconciles sort of various minor changes that were agreed as part of the reserve matters when the various different residential phases were approved. Then there's the open space plan. Through here, sorry, too many screens open. Which amends the location of the neighbourhood equipped area of play, or the NEEP, which is located in the centre here. So this plan essentially just amends some various different bits of the distribution of various different sort of facilities in that area, and again it updates various different elements that were approved through the reserve matters. And the access and movement plan. So a very small change here. You can see that previously there was an arrow indicating an access into the community hub area and the sports facilities down this residential street along the western side. This plan then shows it then coming in from the eastern side, which is generally felt to be more appropriate. This is where more of the non-residential traffic comes in, but also the land levels along the western side are rather challenging. Importantly, the quantum of development is being increased as part of this application to increase the community space from 358 square metres to 1,469 square metres, and that primarily relates to the area around the community hub. So all of those changes come together to update the master plan. The current master plan that Redrow have been building to on the left, and the proposed plan obviously on the right hand side. Overall, we consider the changes to be minor material changes, and the mitigation secured within the outline planning permission and the original section 106 agreement are considered to be sufficient. The application would result in a new planning permission being granted. So deed of variation to the legal agreement is mentioned in the report. That also amends the delivery triggers for when the facilities are required. It essentially moves the delivery trigger back for the community buildings, but we consider that to be acceptable as improved facilities would be provided. So that application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions outlined in Appendix 1. Please don't be concerned by the number of conditions in Appendix 1. They are all of the conditions that were originally imposed on the outline permission. They were granted back in 2014. They have been updated to reflect on all the various different approvals that have taken place during that time, the various different condition discharges that have taken place. One further update from the information that the committee have is in relation to condition 2 in Appendix 1, which relates to the time period where the master plan should be approved. So it establishes a 10-year period for approval of reserved matters from the first approval point of the master plan. Now, what we can't do through this process is essentially give Redrow another 10 years. So we are suggesting that is then changed from 10 years to state the date at which the original master plan was approved, which is then the 16th of November 2025, that would be. But subject to that change, the conditions would be as outlined in Appendix 1, and that is recommended for approval. So moving on to then item 6, and it's the first of the reserved matters relates to the neighbourhood house. This would then be located in the centre of the site, so you can see the red line boundary here. Just important to note that it includes the actual building itself and then public realm areas and sort of play space around the building. The building would be single storey, consist of a fairly simple structure with this freeform canopy above. The building has been designed to have no particularly distinctive sort of front and back, but there is the entrance doors out towards the southern side, and then there's east and west connections out towards the public realm areas either side. The cladding is vertical timber boards, and the canopy itself would then be up to 6 metres in height. So you can see an aerial view there, and what I was mentioning of the front door from the southern side, and then the access through to the play space and to the performance space. This is probably a little bit blurry, so apologies for that. It's probably the best image I could find. But inside the building, the concept is around this sort of community living room, which can be used as a cafe, meeting space, work hub, so a very sort of flexible space. The ancillary space would then flow from this central area. And yeah, division could then be achieved to facilitate, use by sort of parent toddler groups and things like that. The ancillary space includes a commercial kitchen, changing places, toilets. There's also a village shed, which is then accessed from the outside of the building. And this is, and I've mentioned before, that sort of access to the external spaces. This is the movement plan, which is intended to show how it connects through to the rest of the site. So you can see from the master plan previously that it's obviously in the very centre of the site. This is clearly walkable for the community to which it will be serving. And the landscaping has then been designed around sort of these sort of different sort of character areas. The NEEP, so the neighbourhood equipped area of play, was originally a requirement of the outline permission. That's then been sort of enhanced through this proposal and then relocated to be closer to the building. But then areas around this sort of performance space and looking at the way in which this village green area has been enhanced, has been an important component of the scheme. So the report covers various areas around parking, highways. I won't go into an awful lot of detail around those, but obviously I'm happy to take questions. There are, travel plan requirements for for sort of volunteers for the building, but yeah, we obviously consider the overall approach to be acceptable. The building would be built to BREEAM outstanding, so this building and with the community hub would reach a level not seen currently within Ebbsfleet. It performs well against the Building for Life standards. And importantly, the facilities and the spaces have been informed by engagement with the community, either through the original sort of EDC sort of scoping work, and then through various different engagement pieces during the application. So this is the southern area here. You can see the sort of tool shed, sort of package drop-off area. You can see the canopy, the equipped play areas here, and then the performance area over to the western side. So some really helpful images. The buildings around here are phase 2C, and then the school is located to the north. So we're really pleased with the design. So the application is recommended for approval, subject to the conditions outlined in the reports. Members should know we are recommending the removal of condition 1 in the report, which requires a time limit on the implementation of the reserve matters. That's actually covered within separate legislation, so that isn't needed. But apart from that, yeah, the conditions are as recommended. And then the second of the reserve matters is the community hub. So as you can see on this plan, the red line boundary shows that towards the southern sort of southeastern corner of the site there. I think also on the next one, yeah, handy image here. So you've got the axis down towards the A2, down here. You've got the Redrow office located immediately to the north of the site. The Marsden's pub and hotel, phase 1C, which is a residential units and a shop, are located to the north. Phase 2 residential scheme, and then the UKPN electricity substation are then located to the west with the A2 below. So this site would consist of the community building, obviously in the colour there, with then sports pitches, tennis courts, and then the parking area. As it's covered in the report. I was just going to mention, sorry. So yeah, perhaps if I just dwell on this slide for a moment. So I mentioned the different bits of setting. So the Marsden's pub is here, the Spring River, the hotel, the Redrow office, and just in terms of that being quite a good sort of collection hub of non-residential buildings, that works well. The increase in the building size has come from engagement with the community again, and yeah, part of that strategic work. So the reason why it is then deviating from the original outline is because of talking to the community, trying to understand their needs, and the specific ways in which they will be using those facilities. So another piece of work around character areas, obviously the actual sports facilities themselves would obviously be functional, but there's an arrival space towards the northeastern corner, which would then be accommodating the various different bits of parking and the arrival point. So the building will be 2-storey. We consider it to be a form and scale that would be appropriate in the area. So I mentioned that section of Ebbsfleet Green has those different non-residential uses. It's got various different heights of buildings there. It would act as a landmark building, but it has been designed to reference sort of a modern take on an agricultural sort of vernacular there. Clearly defined entrance point, and then the highest part of the building would then be sort of in the most prominent sections. So yeah, some really helpful images have been put in. So the report identifies the minimum requirements in paragraph 617, but as I mentioned, the scheme exceeds those. I haven't included floor plans on this presentation because the floor plans were a little bit busy. But they do include space to support the external sports facilities, so changing spaces, showers, there's a gym in there, there's also a large multifunctional space, a commercial kitchen, meeting rooms, and there's an external terrace where people can then look out onto the sports pitches. So I'll identify a few of those on the images as we go through. So the building again would have black vertical timber cladding, various generous areas of glazing. Yeah, we feel that the scheme would certainly stand out in the area. Parking is provided for the facility. The parking discussions included in paragraph 6.637 onwards. EV charging is included, cycle parking, and things like coaches, delivery, servicing. All of that's been considered in the report. Again, the scheme's been designed to meet BREEAM outstanding, performs well against the Building for Healthy Life, and overall we consider it to be a high quality scheme that would be valuable to the area. So you can see the entrance through here, and at the entrance to the building, the multifunctional space would be towards the eastern side. Various then facilities supporting the sports pitches and the tennis courts over towards the western side. So that's a view from the sports pitches. There's this sort of internal terrace here where people would then be able to then sort of look out onto these areas. And yes, again, recommended for approval, subject to the conditions as outlined in the report. And again, if members could note that we are just recommending the removal of that first condition because that's not needed because of the legislation. Thank you, Chair. I'll stop there.
Right, so that covers all the applications. We, as I've said twice already, we don't have any objectors who are registered to speak. So we now turn to supporters. Now, supporters under our terms of reference are allowed 5 minutes collectively. So if you have more than one speaker, fit within the 5 minutes. Because we've had a presentation on 3 applications, I'm prepared to give you a little bit of latitude on that if you think you need it. So I've got 7 names, but who is going to be the lead speaker? Roland Brass?
Yeah, hi, good afternoon. It's going to be myself and Michael Maskew from Redrow. The reason why we signed everyone else up to speak was just in case there were any specific questions for our consultant team, but it's just going to be me and Mike, and I think it should be much less than 5 minutes, and I think we're just going to provide a summary, but over to Mike and then back to me.
Okay, thanks, Roland. Yeah, just good afternoon. I'll just do a very short introduction and update where Redrow are. So as you know, Redrow Homes purchased the Ebbsfleet Green site back in 2015. This is our flagship site. It's been proven to be hugely successful, and I think we're part way to creating a lasting new community in the Garden City. So in just over 7 years, the site has delivered over 700 homes. It's delivered a 2-form primary school, a small supermarket, a hotel, and a pub and a restaurant. All the residential phases have now been granted approval and are currently being built out. Subject to the economic climate, we expect to be fully occupied by 2025. So the sports pavilion, the sports pitch, and the community hall were all the remaining elements that Redrow had to deliver as part of our Section 106 obligations. But back in 2020, Redrow were approached by EDC to form a joint venture agreement whereby EDC would provide grant funding, and there's an opportunity to enhance the buildings that were quite modest into something quite spectacular, you know, exemplar facilities. But as a measure of our commitment to the Garden City, Redrow fully entered into this joint venture agreement, and we've spent the last 2 years working up these proposals in close tandem with the team at EDC. So detailed design has started. We're keen to push this on and get these buildings delivered as quickly as possible. That detailed design will follow into 2023. We're looking to get a contractor appointed the middle to late part of 2023 with view to a start on site in January 2024. Yeah, and I mean, just to conclude, we look forward to handing over these buildings to EDC, the neighbourhood house and the community hub in 2024 and 2025. And, you know, the aim is to create a lasting legacy for the site. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mike. I'm just going to say a couple of words about planning and just sum up some of the benefits of the proposals. But to kick off, yes, we're very pleased to be presenting these 3 applications to you today, and thank you, Mark, for the excellent presentations covering them all. Yeah, ultimately, Ebbsfleet Green's come a long way. I was part of the original team back in 2014, which secured the initial outline consent, and it's really great. It's amazing to see these 2 community buildings coming forward now, and I think it's a credit to how the flexibility built into that initial consent has meant we're able to apply more of a kind of bespoke approach to what we're doing now. And I think ultimately they are fundamental to achieving the aspirations for the site, for the garden community, by ultimately helping to create these sustainable, inclusive and mixed communities. And so just to spin through some of the key points, I guess, around the proposals. Firstly, the design quality of both the buildings and their immediate surroundings is truly exceptional, and you can see that in the CGIs. Hopefully, the buildings look fantastic, obviously, but also the functionality is really key to the design as well. How they are going to deliver these services and community facilities is really at the heart of what we've tried to do as well. And it's important to recognise that kind of there has been a bespoke approach. EDC have undertaken a significant amount of community consultation over the last couple of years, various studies, and I think there's been thousands of responses as part of that. So that's really kind of helped shape what we're doing so that we can truly meet the needs of the community, and that being not just the new residents but the local area as well. As we said before, both buildings are looking at achieving BREEAM Outstanding, which is really, really positive too. Just high level in terms of planning, ultimately the proposals are in accordance with the outline consent. They're in accordance with local planning policy and EDC's guidance, which is clearly positive. We haven't had any objections, and any matters which were raised as part of the determination process have been resolved one way or another. So finally, just to sum up, yes, the proposals represent sustainable development. Community buildings are key to building, to placemaking, to creating that community. The social impact of these is really going to be meaningful in terms of health and well-being, and just really ultimately providing safe, attractive, comfortable places for people, individuals, groups, teams to meet and just really do their stuff, which is key to creating these successful places. So on that basis, just to sum up, yeah, we hope you agree that these proposals should be advanced, and our team would be happy to answer any questions you might have. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Now going to turn to any questions from committee members. And can I suggest, we're all used to it, but we use the hand raising function. And then, well, that was quick off the mark. Penny.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, Neil. Yes, thank you very much for the presentations. I just wanted to clarify about the parking, sorry to be boring, and particularly the neighbourhood house. I think is it 5 spaces where they are located, and whether you can convince me that they are going to be adequate for that. I know it's only quite a small building, but it could be clarified where they're located, because I wasn't completely sure from the plans. I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Right, is somebody able to help on that?
Yeah, sorry, I can help on that. So I'm from AFL Architects, the architect on the scheme, and I don't know if Alan is on the call from WSP, who's our transport consultant. But I could say, so basically the car parking spaces are located on the Redrow Phase 2C access road, just in front of to the south of the NEAP, if you like. So the 5 spaces are integrated there into that road design, basically. And why we have tried to keep the number of spaces small is obviously to try and encourage people to walk and cycle, and to encourage activity to this quite central site. And we've ensured the connections that are sort of adopted by KCC and run through the site have been kept opened, and that the building is interfaces with them well, so that we have full accessibility for all users. And again, it was just sort of thinking about it was all about ensuring that connectivity in the design, and then hopefully trying to reduce our reliance on parking spaces.
Thank you.
I think Chris, your hand went up next.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I did have a number of questions around the deed of variation and the time limits and triggers, but I think they've been largely answered by both Mark and by Mike. If I have a lingering concern in that general area, though, it's that these triggers are now significantly later than they were, and are actually very near the up to figure of 900 units. We've got occupation, completely community hall, and so on and so forth by 885 dwellings. So that doesn't give the Ebbsfleet much of a stick with which to beat their partners if they're not delivering on time. Just that they can't occupy the last or sell the last 15 units. I wonder whether Mark would like to comment on that. I'd be interested in knowing exactly how many. Is it actually 900 that have got reserve matters approval, or is it shy of that? And actually, how many are actually currently occupied? Mike mentioned in the region of 700. There's some precise figures would be quite helpful. I wondered, I was very interested to see how the buildings themselves had evolved, both in terms of form, size and function. I wondered why the same evolution hadn't occurred with the 3G pitch, which is now, of course, is quite old hat. 4 and 5G are quite common. Is there a particular reason for that, other than the obvious one of cost? And related to that, I'd be interested to hear what provision has been made to cover the cost of replacing that particular artificial pitch at the end of its useful life. They are an expensive item, and it would be unfortunate if adequate provision had not been made to ensure that once the new one had worn out, the new it would be replaced. Thank you, Chair.
Right, who's going to start off on that? Number of different questions. Who's going to deal with the triggers and the numbers?
I think that was probably a question for me, but did you want to go through the questions for the developers, or did you just want to tackle the questions as they come, Neil?
Well, either you Mark could probably know exactly how many reserve matters are approved, and maybe the developer knows exactly how many he's got occupied. I would expect him to. I was just trying to understand what the headroom is between where we actually are today and the 885, given the ambition of the handover fully, you know, these buildings fully fit for purpose in 24/25.
Yeah,
it's
that's
all
fine.
actually realistic. If the world drops off a cliff in terms of mortgage availability and so on and so forth, what's really going to happen?
So the outline approval granted up to 950, and the reserve matters approval have got to 911. So we expect the site to deliver 911. So it's 885. Sort of down from 911. I appreciate that is closer than you would ideally want. Certainly, you would ideally want the community facilities to be coming forward earlier in the overall build programme. We've been obviously working closely with Redrow to understand what the feasibility is in terms of what can be delivered when, without wanting to slow down the residential development, but also supporting the facilities coming forward. So, yeah, you know, I think that we had taken the view that by delaying the trigger, we end up with a better facility, and that's the judgment that we took. But I appreciate that ideally it would have been earlier. And according to our last lot of numbers, 708, I think, have been completed. That was the numbers that we reported to our board in November.
Okay, thank you very much.
And then somebody needs to deal with the pitches, standard of pitch proposed and steps taken to ensure that it's replaced or renewed when it runs out.
Nobody want to claim ownership of that one?
Yeah, sorry, I'll step in. Yeah, so the pitch is down as a 3G pitch in the original section 106 from 2017, but I think we've been told 3G pitches don't exist anymore. So
yeah, they're old hat.
So we are committed to a 4G pitch, and that's what has been budgeted and what's planned. In terms of maintenance, that's not my expertise. Maybe someone from EDC.
Mike, it wasn't so much maintenance. I'm assuming that would be covered by the document that's referenced in the report. But however well these artificial pitches are maintained, they do wear out and need to be replaced. The point of when is again comes back to maintenance and how well that's done. But they do need to be replaced at some point. I wouldn't want the community to find that at the end of the natural life of this new 4G pitch, they're back to playing on a mud patch again. That's not the purpose, is it?
So the obligation on the developer, Chris, is to provide the facility, and then the idea is that then they can then pass that over to an organisation that would then take responsibility for that. So we would expect that discussion to take place then between Redrow and then whoever was then going to take that in case there was any sort of financial considerations around that. So as the applicants suggested, because EDC are working with Redrow on this, the idea is that will then potentially then get passed to EDC in then due course, and then we'll then need to work out management and maintenance around that. But the obligation on the developer is about providing it, and then the maintenance side in terms of replacement then would then take place as part of the landowner sort of deal moving forward.
Okay, thank you, Mark.
I think, Chris, those 3 points have been answered. Whether satisfactorily is for you to others to judge.
The EDC have got deep pockets, that's all. When it comes to that placement.
Valerie.
Thank you. If I raise a couple of points in relation to the presentation first. In terms of the community hub, it is a really attractive design. Thank you for that. And I can see on the east side we've got this lovely garden space, and then on the west side what looks to be an open auditorium. But in terms of the diagrams that you were showing for permeability and access and so on, there doesn't appear to be a bespoke route for pedestrians to pass through that open auditorium, and I'm absolutely certain that people will take a shortcut through it. So I think that's an element that perhaps could do with a little bit more work. It's a very small thing, but I think it would enhance the design and the access and so on. The images are quite small, but that's certainly the way that it looks at the moment, as if pedestrians cannot pass through that particular piece of hard landscaping. The second relates to the other building, which again is attractive, but we had a presentation sent to us, and one of the images, which looked to be, I can't remember if it's a perspective or a projection actually, but what it showed was an articulated facade, which is actually on the main street facade, and none of the images that you showed this evening, also that Mark showed this evening, showed that same elevation. In fact, it's just a flat elevation with the sawtooth roof detailing. But that's quite an important elevation, because it is literally on the streetscape. So again, I know these are all subject to reserve matters and so on, but it does look to me as if it might need a little bit more enhancement, or is there a mismatch in terms of the information that's been presented to us? I wasn't 100% clear. Shall I stop there actually? Because or would you like me to continue with the points that relate to the papers themselves?
Why don't we have an answer to that first, and then you pursue the further questions if you're happy, Valerie.
I think maybe I'm best placed maybe to just address some of those points. So just your first point about access to the auditorium space. I think you mentioned the community hub, but did you mean the neighbourhood house?
Yes,
Yeah,
sorry, I did,
yeah,
yes.
no worries. Yeah. So the intention of that space is to be very much so an open public realm space. So if any of the arrows of that weren't necessarily drawn explicitly across it, that's no way the intention. The intention is very much so that is part of the public realm. There will be bollards to control access. So it's very much so an occasional vehicle route, full-time public space, if that makes sense. And that's been the intent of the design through it. So it's very much so part of that sort of public realm. That ties in with sort of the canopy design to give some sort of covered inside-outside space. We're imagining that space to be used quite extensively by people just on their day-to-day routes across Ebbsfleet Green and across the Garden City in general. And so that's the nature of the space. So if that wasn't clearly demonstrated, that's just apologies about that. Regarding the second point then, I'm not exactly sure what images you were talking about previously. It may be the perspective images that we have previously of it rather than the flat elevations. And it is quite a dynamic.
Three-dimensional.
Yes, it is quite a dynamic facade, mainly because of the north-facing roof lights that are added to the community hall space. And so these create quite a distinctive, if you like, profile along the eastern facade on the hotel side. So as you approach the building from basically the shop and coming up towards the bar, basically, if you like, as you approach the building up towards that, you get that sort of that corner approach of those two quite distinctive angling up facades to that high point, and then you've got the distinctive north-facing roof lights on the eastern facade. So I hope that yes, that image exactly, yeah.
Yes, so on one of the images, and it probably was a perspective actually, it showed that same facade, but with it being articulated as well as having the sawtooth, and it's clearly different on what we're looking at today. So
there was a minor.
And indeed, that elevation is different from the one you've just shown, isn't it? Because you have fenestration, or it looks to be. I'm not 100% clear what I'm looking at, but then equally, I'm guessing these aren't the absolute final versions anyway, because it's still all subject to reserve matters, isn't it?
Well, I think there may have been a minor change that has occurred, obviously, because we are obviously dealing with a bit of inflation in the market. So there was minor changes to the design this year in October to help to try and reconcile some of those issues as obviously we've gone for funding basically, and then we had to reconcile with some of the inflation in the market. So there was minor changes to that facade. However, we are very confident though that the overall articulation of the facade is still very strong and still creates that sort of dynamic and beacon on the approach that we hope to achieve.
So the flat elevation.
Can I just, before you ask your next question, Valerie, we were given a presentation, and can I just probably fail here, share my screen, because I may have the image that Valerie was thinking of. I don't know, and it may be a red herring, but let's try. So on this one, there seems to be a different approach where my cursor is there. I don't know whether that's what you were thinking about, Valerie.
That's exactly what I was thinking about. But even in this most recent presentation, the perspective shows a flat elevation which is blind, and the elevations show fenestration. So I'm just not 100% clear what I'm looking at. And indeed, we now have this third image which Neil has flagged. And we don't need to. I mean, I'm assuming this will come back because it's a reserve. It'll come back through reserve matters, will it not? But it just worries me a little bit that I'm not 100% sure what we're being offered in terms of the architecture, as it were.
Okay, so just to clarify, so this is the reserve matters, so we need to get comfortable on the appearance. So this won't come back apart from through the condition details. So obviously, if the application was approved, we would be approving the drawings, obviously, rather than the CGI. So yes, it would be those drawings. yeah, the only drawing that I have in the presentation pack is the elevation drawing for the north and the south side that I showed previously. So I can reshare that and try to dig out the other elevations if that would be helpful. They will be somewhere. But we will be approving the drawings rather than CGIs. Yeah.
Okay. So this shows 2 elevations, and
Yep.
actually they are a bit more lively, a bit more vibrant than that CGI that we just saw. That's fine. Thank you very much. But we don't have the western and southern elevations, do we? I don't think.
No, I haven't put those on the presentation. I don't know if they're in the developer pack or if I can. You just bear with me. I will find those.
We also didn't see the plans for this building, which is, I think, an omission, if I'm candid.
I agree. A plan would be really helpful, useful to
Because we can't relate the plan to the elevation, or indeed, you know, access and so on in terms of the site plan.
The beauty of everything being online is that in theory everything is to hand. Right, I think I have the. Yes, so I have some elevations here. If I just share these with you. This is one of the drawings that have been submitted in the application. So all of this information is online on public access. So this is the northern elevation here, and then the southern elevation of the community up here.
Thank you.
And I can share the other image in a moment for the east and west.
No, this is fine, and I can forgive me, I can't speak for colleagues, but I can now understand the scheme, I think, completely, other than we don't have the plans that correlate with these. But in terms of the visual appearance, the massing, the scale and so on, and the fenestration, I do understand. Thank you.
Okay, great. So if I just quickly show the east and west then. And then that's those two there. Sorry, yeah.
Yeah.
And yeah, a couple of committee members have mentioned the plans. Can I just check? Is that the internal floor plans you were interested in?
Yes, it would be helpful,
Yes.
wouldn't it, to.
Okay, let me just find those. Unless someone else has them to hand.
Yeah, sorry, Mark, I have them if you want me to share. I wasn't sure if I could in the
do, that might be quicker, thank you.
No worries.
They will definitely be on our system somewhere. I'm not quite sure what they were marked up as. As I say, apologies. I did consider putting these in the presentation, but there was an awful lot of information on them, and I wasn't sure how they would come up on screen. But I do agree that it's obviously important for the committee to understand. So, yeah, in the presentation I was mentioning the various different internal spaces that were supporting the sports facilities. There's different areas of changing rooms, showers, internal changing places, toilets there, ground floor level, and then there's the multifunctional space, which is on the eastern side, towards the hotel side, as it were. So the tennis court towards the south, and then the sports pitches are towards the west. Do you have the first floor as well there?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
And then at first floor level, there's sort of an atrium where the multifunctional hall sort of is, and then there's gym space, meeting rooms, and then there's that external terrace that I'm highlighted on the images there, where people could then look out onto those sports facilities.
Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Yeah, it was really helpful. Thank you.
Right. So
Thank you very much, and I can confirm, because I've been following using the Ebbsfleet website and had the drawings, and they're all there. So we had them and we are aware of them. Thank you.
Thank you.
Valerie, I think you had another question, and then we'll go to
There's
Penny
everything
after that.
else. They didn't exactly correlate, and that was my issue. I wasn't 100% sure what we were moving, but now I understand, or otherwise, indeed, it's obviously a committee decision. But now I completely understand the scheme, so thank you very much. And indeed, I do think it's attractive. So if we go back to the papers, I mean, I had a similar concern to Chris Hall. I mean, it does worry me that we are so close to completion of the entire scheme, and I would feel much more comfortable if we still had a time limitation as well as a numeric in terms of the houses. Simply because, to be honest, if you get to 884, for example, and then we never get the flipping facility, and I don't want to be Machiavellian about this, but bill costs are high, times are tough, aren't they? So I would much prefer there still to be a time limitation on the trigger as well as the numeric housing one. And there was just a small point actually that relates to the bigger sports facility, but it seemed quite important to me, and I couldn't see it anywhere in the conditions, which is where the Kent County Councils were saying that they wouldn't adopt the roads because of the design, change the material, drainage channels and so on. And I couldn't see that had been picked up anywhere in the various conditions. I may have missed it, in which case I apologise. But the section that I'm looking at is under the publicity and consultation responses. But clearly we would wish the road to be adopted or to an adoptable standard. And I don't know if you have any feedback on that, or whether design has evolved further, or indeed whether it is conditioned and I just missed it.
Valerie, so do you know if that was in the neighbourhood house application or the community hub? It's a bit tricky trying to do three at once, isn't it? Yeah, but
it was in the neighbourhood house, Mark. I'd pick the same point up. It's under section 4 consultations, the response from KCC, where they know that the road would not be adopted with the materials proposed.
And the drainage solution proposed as well. So I could, that can be dealt with, but it just doesn't seem to me to be incorporated in the
applicant's highways a consultant here, Alan, so perhaps he can provide some information on that.
Thank you.
Hello, yes, Alan, I'm the transport consultant. Yeah, if it's okay, I'll just share a plan which hopefully makes it clear what we're proposing. So this is a plan we provided in the transport addendum notes, which shows the area to be adopted as highway, shaded as pink. Hopefully you can all see that. So we've discussed this with Kent, and they're happy with the proposals. So the issue was really Kent adopting the part of the road where we were using non-standard materials. So essentially it's the performance space which would be sort of nice brick sets, etc., not your sort of standard tarmac. So and that was the issue really that Kent had. So we've had a bit of dialogue with them over the last few months, and this has now been agreed. So the areas to be adopted is shown in pink on that plan. So hopefully that's clear. Yes, obviously Ackers Drive shown on the left-hand side of this image. The proposed neighbourhood house is shown to the right of the performance space, which is the concentric paving. So hopefully that's clear to understand. And the proposed parking is along the south edge of the site here. Hopefully you can see my cursor. So this has been addressed now. It was a comment that Kent raised initially, correct? Yeah.
Thank you. So it doesn't need to be conditioned because you've resolved it, which is great. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. And just in relation to the other point, Ian, are you able to say something, obviously, in relation to EDC funding? Because obviously that's one of the other conundrums in terms of triggers and delivery here. Yeah,
happy to, Mark. So as has been mentioned before, EDC has been working very closely with Redrow to facilitate enhancement of these buildings over and above what the original consent might have provided. And I have to say, through no fault of their own, and really as a result of EDC not being in a position to be able to confirm its funding until fairly recently, that's largely been the cause of the delay. So I think Redrow would have been in a position to deliver something much earlier if it hadn't been desirable on our part to enhance the facilities and we'd been able to confirm our funding. We are proposing to enter into a grant agreement with Redrow, and there would be mechanisms in there so that if in order to guarantee delivery of the buildings with the use of EDC funding, there would be mechanisms to do that. Of course, that doesn't overcome, you know, the overall delivery, because they may choose not to enter into the grant agreement and so on and so forth. But as I say, in terms of the Redrow as the applicants, they've the non-delivery so far, and the reason the triggers have to be moved is down to us not being able to confirm our funding.
And I suppose just to say, as part of the negotiation on that, we have agreed with Redrow to bring forward the allotments on the site, which I appreciate was obviously a different type of facility, but obviously it is part of the community infrastructure on the site.
And I think just before we go to Penny, but taking up a point on the timing, if somebody can just explain why it's condition 1 on the 2 later applications. It's the details, it's not the section 73, because the section 73 we have to leave the timing as it is and we can't interfere with that. And the timing as it was expressed originally was a timing for when the reserve matters in effect fell away if the development wasn't carried out by a particular time. It wasn't a mechanism to ensure that the community facility was delivered by a particular time. That trigger is when you get to a certain number of homes. Have I understood that correctly? But perhaps somebody could explain why we're removing those 2 conditions on timing, or it's being recommended.
On the reserve,
I think they're dealing with different things.
Yes, so yes, the current recommended condition 1s on 2 of the reserve matters talk about when the scheme should be commenced rather than necessarily completed, and those conditions aren't needed because legislation essentially says that anyway, so we don't need to be replicating what legislation already says. There's already a mechanism to control that.
But I think I'm right in saying that that is not relevant to the trigger. The trigger point is the number of units. So we're not taking away a trigger point by removing those conditions. Have I understood that correctly?
That's correct. Yes, yes.
Thank you. Can we turn to Penny?
Thank you. Yeah, my question was more about the internal layout, having seen the plans of the community hub. And I noticed on the ground floor there's a kitchen and servery, but there doesn't seem to be seating space for that. And I wondered if that was maybe just to serve as a kind of takeaway or the community space. And then on the first floor, there is, again, kitchen, servery and cafe space. And I just wanted to check that the cafe would be of sort of the standard that would be suitable for a commercial outside provider, if that was the intention. So it's just a bit of clarification about how you see both of those spaces being used. Thank you.
Yes, of course. So I think when we were developing the design and sort of the internal workings of the space, I think a lot of people were thinking about the community hall space, and it made a lot of sense to situate the cafe at level 1, where you could sort of bleed out onto the external terrace. You'd have views over the pitch. You could have the meeting rooms off that space, and there's a certain sensibility because the site is very tight, obviously, because we've increased our program from the original, basically what the master plan was designed around. So we're trying to fit it all on the site, and it's quite a tight sloping site, so we're trying to get all that in. It made a lot of sense to put the cafe and the kitchen associated with that on level 1, but people were thinking about, well, if the community hall was to have an event in it, let's say, and it was to have you know, a catering event or something that you need a warm-up kitchen, let's say, and the logic behind it was that there would be a small servery that could be used. Maybe it's before you go to an event in the community hall, you could, you know, there could be a little drinks reception or something could manage in that type of space. That was the thinking of it. But then it also had, there was a lift space very closely located by it, so if you did need to move food or catering equipment up and down, that would be, you know, something that you could do, rather than providing necessarily a kitchen on each level. That was sort of the thinking behind it.
Thank you, that's helpful.
Right, have we got any other questions? No, well, I think that was very helpful, and thank you very much to Mark and to the applicant team for that information. What we're going to do now is to move to items 5, 6 and 7 and take them in turn. That gives an opportunity for members, if they'd like to contribute to debate rather than questions. As I say, if you'd like to. So we'll go to item 5, and item 5 is the section 73 application. So it's an application for planning permission for developing without complying with conditions previously attached, because different conditions are now proposed. Would anybody like to make a contribution on that? So can I take it that everybody's satisfied, got all the information they would like? Valerie?
Just as one thing, which is really to Mark. You described this as being minor material, which, you know, a minimal departure from the extent. And I wasn't, I know with section 73s, they are minor. And I just wondered why you were interpreting it as minor material, and indeed what you meant by that, I guess. I mean, I suppose fundamentally, is it appropriate to deal with under section 73 because we're dependent on your advice?
Yeah, and I think that these are judgment calls essentially. So, you know, we either have a scenario where things are classed as non-material, so very, very small, minor material, or something then requires, you know, sort of a much greater change and, you know, and almost a new permission. In this instance, because there were, you know, changes to parameter plans, which I outlined on the presentation, which were all very sort of subtle adjustments if you look at everything in the whole, and then coupled with the increase in the floor space, the increase in floor space for the community floor space was then assessed against the environmental statement. The mitigations were okay. The impact of the scheme then wasn't increasing over and above the original impact being caused. Therefore, we're content to be recommending approval. It is a minor change.
Okay, thank you very much.
I have to say, I don't have an issue because it's a section 73 application, but it doesn't have to be called minor material or material or anything. In fact, we cannot change the description of development. And therefore, I mean, these applications are persistently put in with this type of description, which I have to say is not entirely appropriate, because you cannot change the description of development on a section 73. What you're doing is changing the conditions. So I don't think those words have any effect whatsoever, as far as I'm concerned. But I agree with you, Valerie, that it's a slightly strange description, but no doubt that was the application that was received, and therefore we have to determine the application is made, but we are not changing the description of development. What we're asked to do is to change the conditions so as to allow the change the parameter plans and to change the numbers in the conditions which allow us to have a larger community centre.
That's really helpful. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, it's probably the I hope I haven't, I mean, it's for the officers to explain that, but I hope I've got that right. Somebody tell me if I've got it wrong.
So thank you, yes.
So if there are no other, should we move to, is everybody content that we move to a vote on item 5? The recommendation is to approve, and I propose that we approve in accordance with the recommendation.
Seconded, Chair.
Everybody's nodding?
I agree.
Agreed?
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, well, that's unanimous. So let's move on to item 6. And this is the neighbourhood house. So we're being asked to approve the details submitted under the conditions. Anybody have any views that they'd like to contribute as part of the debate on this? Good. Well, I think we have had a debate, and can I say for my part that I am encouraged by these proposals. They're the result of consultation with the community, and I very much hope that this will be a good example that will be followed elsewhere in Ebbsfleet of providing good quality community facilities for people to use, which is essential if we're going to build community in the Garden City, is my view. So I welcome having a larger community centre than was originally envisaged. Anybody else like to contribute before we move to make a decision?
Thank you. We've had the conversation earlier. So
I'm afraid I didn't hear all of that, Valerie. I don't know whether others did.
Apologise. Sorry, I contributed my views, I think, in the earlier discussion, but I do agree that this is a very attractive proposal, and I think will be a benefit to the community.
Agreed.
Good.
Yeah, and I would agree that as well.
Good. Well, do we approve this application?
Approved, yes.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. Unanimous. And then we've got the community hub building, which is item 7, which we've had a discussion about. We've considered the elevations, we've considered the internal design. Anybody like to contribute to the debate on this? No. Well, and for those who might be listening at this stage, we have had a discussion on this. We've established exactly what is being proposed. And again, it's a carefully designed scheme, which hopefully will be of great benefit to the community. So are we agreed that we should approve this application for approval of details?
Yes.
You do agree, Jeff?
Yes. Good. So that is unanimous. Thank you very much indeed. So that completes our consideration of the community hub neighbourhood house proposals at Ebbsfleet Green. So we'll go on to item 8, which is the planning activity report. This is for noting. Mark.
Yes, me again. Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, this is the activity report to cover the performance for the period for quarter 2. So it's the usual report. We're assessing against the usual previously defined performance standards in terms of 8 and 13-week applications and the way in which appeals are looked at. When we brought this to the committee last time, there was a specific request around identifying the number that were subject to a bespoke agreed timescale, sort of within the number that had fallen within the statutory period, and that is identified in 2.3. So out of the period, there were 10 applications that fell within the requirements, and then 6 of those were then subject to the bespoke timescale. Just to reflect on that, I see that as a positive. We do work closely with the developers, trying to understand their delivery programs, trying to understand their priorities. So we have been agreeing either PA, so planning performance agreement, or planning extension agreements on various different schemes. And of course, always, this is only a small component of the overall work. So there's an awful lot of work that the teams do around condition discharge applications, various different amendments, various different applications that don't fall within the statutory returns. So there isn't obviously an awful lot of work going on as well as the content. But this is for noting, as you say, Chair.
Thank you. Well, I think the officers should be congratulated that we've got 100% figures at 2.4 for within the time or within the time agreed. And I think there would be few local planning authorities which were able to report those figures. So well done to Mark and the team for that. Can I just ask on 4.1, we've got planning application fees, April, June 22, 111,000, and then we come down July, September, 63,000. Does that reflect a fall off in applications, or?
Well, I suppose ultimately that would be because there was a reduced number of applications that would be submitted over the summer period. It is very uncommon for us to ever have a nice smooth trajectory of constant workflow and know exactly what happens and what comes in. So yes, generally the fee income is quite clunky during the year. Year on year, we also seem to get quite a lot of submissions around the end of March, which has been a slight challenge. So there has been I suppose a reduction in the number of submissions over the summer period, but we are finding that a lot of those are coming in now or they're targeted for January. So I would expect that the fees would be more when we report that. Certainly one application alone was more than 63,000, just one submission last month. So yes, we'll be increased again for quarter 3. So
you're being kept busy. Good.
Oh well, yes. Any of the team on the call will be able to testify to that. Yeah, that's fine.
Thank you very much. Well, that's for noting. Shall we note that report and thank the officers?
Agreed.
Thank you.
Thank
you.
Delegated items report number 9. Next.
Yep. So 16 decisions.
Back to you, Mark. Mark, on my screen, you're frozen, but we can hear you. But I don't know whether that's the same for everybody else.
Same for me.
Same, yeah.
Is it? Oh, apologies.
Well, we can hear you, so that's fine.
Back on again, if that helps. So yeah, so 16 decisions made under delegated powers between October and November. So the usual report, just to be transparent about the decision making that we're doing internally. Happy to take any questions, or obviously the committee can follow up with the officers if there's any queries.
Could I ask one question, please, Chair?
Yes, of course.
Thank you. On page 3, Mark, there's one there which has the reference to 0157, the enlargement of a driveway hard standing to create extra parking space. It caught my eye simply because developers often have a tough time dealing with the required standards for runoff rates, greenfield runoff rates being achieved and so forth. And there's a great drive, I think, towards having permeable parking wherever possible. And yet here we are. I mean, do we take the word hard standing literally? Are we actually undoing bit by bit all the hard work that goes into achieving the required runoff rates by letting people put more hard standing on their front gardens?
Michael, do you know the answer to this? Michael Jessup, I think that he would have signed this off.
Yeah, I can. Yeah. It was a condition requiring the hard surfacing to be permeable paving to replicate the existing. So it was only a very, very narrow additional margin just to get the additional space on it. So, but it was permeable paving.
Permeable, so it wasn't hard standing. It was permeable hard standing. Yeah.
Yes.
Thank you. I'm reassured. Thank you.
Good. Glad to know that the officers are on the case and that people aren't undoing the good work that's been done before. Anything else on the delegated items report? No. Well, we will note that. So that on my agenda brings Valerie.
It's really for information. I don't know how we deal with this. I mean, one of the applications under delegated powers is an application from one of our own committee members. How do we manage conflicts of interest? And this is really just for my own information rather than in relation to that particular application, but it just suddenly struck me that there must be some method of managing these types of issues.
Yeah, absolutely. If I could, yeah, probably best if I answer. Yeah, so interestingly, the terms of reference don't cover scenarios at the moment around, for example, EDC staff or committee members. So we are intending to do a review of the terms of reference just to make sure that the delegations down to myself and the team are appropriate. That's certainly something that we're targeting for 2023. In this instance, it actually felt more appropriate for it to be signed off under delegated powers rather than necessarily coming to the committee. You know, in the same way that if it was, for example, a colleague of mine, it would probably feel more appropriate for it to come to committee rather than necessarily be signed under delegated powers. So yeah, please be sort of assured we do consider sort of all of those things in the appropriate form to be taking all of those decisions in. But I think as the organisation develops and as the community develops, some of these sort of slightly sort of day-to-day things that are sort of appearing. So it is something that's on the radar, and we'll look at that yeah, next year.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Anything else from anybody before I close the meeting?
Well, thank you.
No, well, thank you very much, everybody, for attending. Let's hope that this is encouraging to see a well-designed community facility. Let's hope there are more of them, and hope that everybody has a very good break over the Christmas